over 500 people who have signed up for this conference today. And that was before we closed down registration for space limitations. I want to thank you very much for being here. My name is Sharona Justman, and actually I have one technical thing. I realized it's in my pocket. We have here a stellar group of people that have come together that have made possible this conference today. Many of them, as you'll have in your booklet today, you'll see we have a fantastic organizing team. The organizing team, you'll meet them throughout the day. We've had some stellar support from Isabel Maxwell, who's here in the room, from Glen Yeago, who you'll be hearing from this morning, from Iran Wagner of CVIDIA, from David Ben-Ami, the chairman of MacroCure, from Yair Landau of Mass Animation, from Ayelet Weinerman of Joy Productions, Igal Litovsky from Shamrock, Baruch Littman from the Jewish Foundation, Chris Rice of Checkpoint, Dan Yukelson of Premier Radio Networks, and a host of others throughout our great community between Los Angeles and Israel who have helped work tirelessly for these past months throughout 2009 to bring a conference like this together. We have also wonderful thanks to all of our sponsors, which you have listed here before us, starting with Answers.com, whom you'll hear from today. We have also Mark Enterprises, Checkpoint, Shepard Mullen, Price Waterhouse, Morrison & Forrester, McCormick Legal Advisors, ZAG, Rubenstein Justman. We have Silicon Valley Bank, Bank Leumi, Mitchell Silverberg and Knupp, New Century Capital Partners. We have the Southern California Israel Chamber of Commerce, and we have Blumberg Capital. Let's have a round of applause for all those sponsors who have made today so successful. In addition to that, we've had a host of community sponsors and media sponsors that have stood up and said, we want to participate, we want to bring our business executives to the Israel conference. It starts with the media such as The Marker, which is Israel's largest economic paper. We have Premier Radio Networks, we have the Israel Venture Center, we have Business Wire who's helped us, we have Olmsted Williams, we have the State of Israel, we have iHollywood Forum, Witty, the Santa Monica Observer, LARTA, Maverick Angels, American Friends of Hebrew University. We have C4 Partners, the Los Angeles Business Journal, O2 Cool Water, and Yarden Wines later on this afternoon, and many more. These are fantastic, and please give me a round of applause for all these folks that have come together to make today possible and make your admission reasonable and happy. I'd like to introduce our very first sponsor, Price Waterhouse, who is here to give a few remarks. And let me introduce you to Glen Beer from Price Waterhouse, a partner here in California.
Thanks. Good morning to everyone. As Sharona mentioned, my name is Glen Beer. I'm a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the audit practice here in Southern California. I focus on working with emerging companies. I'm in our Emerging Company Services group, which works with venture-backed companies from startup through IPO or other exit. We also have a similar practice in Israel. Some of you may know us there as Kesselman & Kesselman. And one of the things we do in our practice is track venture capital investment. So if anybody's interested outside, we have reports on venture capital investment for Q1, both here in Southern California and in Israel. And with that, I really want to thank Sharona and her team for putting on such a great event, and we're thankful to be a sponsor.
Beautiful. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Israel Conference, as you know, is focused on business, and we are a forum to explore new business opportunities together. We want you to meet today with the best of the innovation leaders out of Israel. We're going to be meeting with folks who represent the most forward-thinking of technologies that Israel brings to the world. Oftentimes, these technologies are mission critical, and you'll find them in every device you have in your pocket, in every technology you have in your office, and every time you go to the doctor's office, you'll find a piece of Israel standing right before you, helping you to get through your day and to change the way our behavior is, not only as we wake up in the morning, but all the way through the time we go to sleep at night, and it has changed the world from California to Israel. An objective of our conference today is to provide a very rich day of discussion with industry lions and leaders, to network, to make deals happen, and to expand our knowledge and extend your reach as to where you can do deals in Israel. In our conference today, we've put together an assembly of the greatest thinkers that are in Israel as well as here in California. From the founder of instant messaging, which all of you know about and you will meet personally today, through the CEO of one of the fantastic medical technologies of the pill cam, which you'll learn about this afternoon. We have in this room alone over $20 billion of capital represented by our speakers alone. If you can't get a deal done here today, you're not working the room. And that's you should be bringing your ideas straight up to each of the panelists and to the people you'll be meeting today and saying, I need to talk to you. I have a deal to get done, so that you can walk over to a colleague after this conference and say, my deal got funded by an Israeli VC. I know an Israeli who has a deal who needs to get it funded. We want to take out of this conference today to move the locus of Israeli business right here into Southern California. With all love to our Northern California brethren, we want California to span from San Francisco to Los Angeles and have that El Al flight flying on a regular basis, 13 hours, not 18, between LA and Tel Aviv, where we know that the channel of business is right here, because we represent the second largest city in the United States, and we should be standing up proudly with the flag of Israel and the flag of California and the flag of the United States saying we're open for business, especially in a market like this where fortunes can be made. When you're in a down market, this is the time to create your next deal. And our mantra for this conference is, your next deal is here, especially doing deals with business. Not only will you meet some of the greatest leaders who have founded companies in Israel, who are running companies in Israel, or who are funding companies in Israel, you're going to get a lot of food today too, which is very stylistic of the Israel conference. One of your takeaways from today's conference will be a few things. One is, I'd like you to leave here telling a story. Walk up to another business colleague and say, did you know that the Centrino chip was developed by the Intel engineers in Israel, and our computers would not run as fast without the great technology that comes out of Israel? Tell that story, tell it over and over. The strongest thing that we can do to create new business is to make our business colleagues know what the value is that's coming out of Israel. The second thing I'd like you to do is introduce Israeli companies into your short list of candidates that you're considering to do business with. Make them high up on that list, evaluate them, bring them in as candidates with whom you will contract, you will joint venture, you will fund, or you will acquire. These are important things, and then announce it boldly and confidently that their corporate offices are in Jerusalem, in Haifa, in Beersheba, in Tel Aviv, and in California, in Northern California and in Southern California. The next thing, we have 500 or more people who are coming here. We have a lot of press that are here today. We have a lot of action. Make connections, collect everyone's business cards, call them up afterwards, and extend this conference through the rest of the year and beyond. Remember that when you come back next year, I'd like you to send us your announcement that says, because of this conference, you met somebody, you did a deal, and your next deal is going to be here again, year over year. So I want to thank you all for coming. We couldn't do this without our sponsors. We couldn't do it without our community partners, and we certainly could not do it without the greatness of all of you attending and telling your colleagues about it. A few administrative things. Lunch will be at 12:40. We have breaks in the middle of the morning, a break in the middle of the afternoon. We have a fabulous reception planned for the evening as we go into our media and technology session. There will be people coming all day long. Parking is $7 for each car. We negotiated a good price on that. And we hope that you will spend as much time as you can talking to each other, listening to our panelists, our presenters, and something very innovative, our fasting cools that will happen all throughout the day. I want to thank you very much. Remember, this is where we learn about Israel, we do business with Israel, and we make deals happen right here. With that in mind, I'd like to bring up one of our most wonderful economists that we are so proud to have right here in LA, who's opened up great centers, a great center in Israel for job creation and for new technology, new economic innovation. As you all know, and many of you have attended his forums and the conference that he runs, I'd like to bring up the very special Glen Yeago from the Milken Institute.
Thank you, Sharona, and thank you all for being here today. If I were to describe to you a country that was encompassed by, on one side, vast environmental challenges, and on the other side by arranging continents or a series of conflicts, and describe that country as one in which major breakthroughs are made in agricultural technology, in energy technology, and also in terms of social capital and in social organization and in business formation and in innovation. A country that was able to develop the fundamental forms of the modern corporation in terms of joint stock companies, was able to develop alternative sources of energy and new agriculture and other technology products, and pioneer major innovations in commerce and trade. And to say even more so that the types of technology, both the hard technologies and the soft technologies that would emerge from that country, would then become the DNA and the source code for the development of the modern world. I wouldn't be talking about Israel, I'd be talking about Holland in the 17th century, which was caught between the raging seas and the development of different types of water prevention and land restoration technology and the building of dikes, in the development of the Joint Stock Corporation, the development of the first capital markets, and the development of accounting and financial standards, and the development of global trade organizations that were able to open up a society from within and create the seeds of democracy that were then the imprint, according to a great historian and friend of ours at the Milken Institute, Walter Russell Mead, has written extensively about Holland in the 17th century and how that country started to cast and develop the source code for modern democracies in Britain, in the UK, and later the American Republic. And that notion and that vision of open societies from within and open to without really became the cast of innovation which defined the next 4 centuries. In a very odd way, Israel plays a very similar role, caught between the obvious conflicts that everyone's painfully aware of, that pains both Israel and its neighbors, and the ability to overcome it and to redefine and re-engineer and to look at it. I think those are some of the sorts of issues you'll be looking at today, whether it's in information and communication technology or looking at clean technology, looking at medical technology and life sciences, all areas that we've been intimately involved with at the Milken Institute and with this conference, and really huge compliments to Sharona and her team for putting this together. And to see really in terms of what goes on in the relationship of how the private sector and the initiatives that emerge within a market start to redefine and start to, in the midst of problems, seek solutions. So if you start to understand the dynamics that are going on in this country and in Israel, and understand the dynamics which are problem solving rather than problem creating, and to look at it as a laboratory for solution sets that emerge in all the arrays of global problems based on the diversity and the types of society that's emerging there. Those are some of the things that we'll discuss in the dialogue that will go on, but let's talk about it in the context of this current massive global financial crisis and to try to understand how Israel is navigating its way through it. In the first half of the year, in 2008, there was really that turning point, nonetheless Israel seemed to be coasting along at a high level of economic activity, a low rate of unemployment, surplus in the current account, high savings rates, the reduction of its debt, and high profits in the business sector. Things started to change, obviously, in the fall, as they did in most other countries. And you see, let's see if this is going to forward. See, I'm not advancing as I should. Somebody tech around here can help me with this. Well, here we go. In the last quarter, there were sharp decreases in exports which proceeded, and tax revenues, a reduction in private consumption, the labor market and employment expansion came to a halt, and employment began to rise. And you can see just in terms of the numbers here, what actually has been going on, looking at a 1.5% drop. The first quarter was around a 3.5% drop overall. But this should be understood relatively, and we'll see what the real story actually is relative to other countries. Clearly, Israel, a country which is very dependent upon exports and has been very important. This issue about opening up to international trade has been really key, obviously cannot remain unscathed from what's occurred. The export reduction was due to an overly strong shekel during 2007, most 2008, and some reduction in investment. So Israel is definitely part of the global recession. And again, looking at, as we're going to go into, what is the experiment here? What is the setup of an experimental setup to understand how the country is going to approach and resolve these types of issues? Exports 45% of GDP, looks like it's going to decline on the order of around 20%. The credit markets began to dry up after the end of the last quarter. Investments, which were the main export driver in high-tech, started to hit a wall. The financial sector has been in better shape than in the U.S. and the Europe, but has been exposed to a high concentration of capital, relatively low free float. We're currently working on that with the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and we can take some questions and talk about that in a minute. And unemployment has definitely been on the rise. It's in that context that the new government announced its new economic program to address exactly all of those issues. $5 billion in government guarantees to the banks in terms of small business, based on the idea of leveraging small business loans out of the banks on a program that we've helped develop with the Correct Foundation and the government's guaranteed loan program. Tax reductions for companies in the middle class, reducing the number of foreign workers, negative income tax, reforms, major reforms, rather than slow down reforms, accelerate the levels of reforms in terms of the Israel Land Authority, in ports and the electrical system, in terms of starting to allow for the development of feed-in tariffs and alternative energy, and massive increases in infrastructure investment in transportation, water, and energy that had been gone begging over previous years. The government's financial program that was introduced as a response to the crisis is quite dramatic and important. The establishment of, again, public-private partnerships, not unlike, but in some ways more advanced than the models that we have in the United States, of developing non-bank credit, of private investment funds with government capital that would increase the availability of credit from the non-banking sector, establishing state guarantees for the banking sector to raise capital for Tier 2 capital within the financial structure of the bank regulatory system, and also for loans to small businesses. What's interesting is really the continuity of the dynamic of economic and financial reform in the country that we've been really honored to be part of over the last 12 years. What's interesting, and sometimes a point of humor, but it's quite serious, there's obviously problems with the electoral system in Israel. Average minister lasts there about a year and a half. When I was reporting one time the results of one of my colleagues' studies in Israel, Dave Nachmias from the Interdisciplinary Center, that 70% of government decisions were not implemented, somebody here in the United States said, well, that's not a bad idea. But on the other hand, it does create certain problems. But what we do see, though, is an enormous continuity of a movement towards reform between all governments. The pro-market approach was successfully implemented through various numbers of irreversible reforms and policy measures throughout, invariant to government coalitions. The main achievement of this approach is it's been very ingrained in public opinion, and it really doesn't make that much difference who's in power, because the parties find themselves committed to the reforms and to fiscal consolidation. The real dispute in Israel is about where to allocate the budget, not specifically about the size. The dynamic and the discipline by the central bank, especially under the leadership of Stan Fischer, has been really quite enormous in terms of providing that type of continuity as well, and leadership in monetary policy. So I think this, it's important to understand the continuity and the stability. Despite changes in government, an enormous stability in policy. The policy regime has not really altered that much. So the accelerated growth target that's been identified, we have Yossi Hollander here from the Israeli Institute for Economic Planning, can elaborate on this, and certainly did at our conference, about how to approach, and it's a joint effort by all of us, I think, that are focused on the issues of growth and capital formation and job creation in Israel, to look at trying to accelerate the growth rate, to try to achieve, again, to look back at that 17th century Dutch model and look at the, as other people have written about, the types of leapfrogging that have occurred in other places, how Israel can consolidate an aggregate growth rate of 4.5% over the next 30 years to start to bridge the economic gaps that have existed and to accelerate quite dramatically. One of the initiatives is to focus on the financial competitiveness of the marketplace. That we and the finance ministry and all of our colleagues in Israel continue to work aggressively on to accelerate in this 100th anniversary year of Tel Aviv next week. The International Organization of Securities Exchanges, the IOSCO, will meet for the first time in Israel, of all stock exchanges and security markets, and to look at Tel Aviv, which certainly is the cool capital of the Middle East. Some might say there's not that much competition, but on the other hand, Tel Aviv really is accelerating in terms of its position as a place in the center of both of hard and soft technologies and innovation and communication and all the areas that you're going to be discussing today. I'm going to just, there are some other indicators that you'll see, and we'll probably have this presentation on the Israel Conference website, that are unique form and characteristics of market resilience that are there. The increased growth rates that existed prior to the financial crisis, the high rates of personal savings, a stable financial system, the beginning of the emergence of a non-banking credit market that we have been very much involved with, the low rate of bad debts prior to the financial crisis, the relatively low exposure to the toxic assets that were here in the U.S. banking system, but things that need to, as structured markets start to emerge and the real estate market starts to come back, are very key. Clearly, Israel can't escape the trends of the market overall, but it is really quite interesting, I think, in this graph. It might not be that visible here, but if you study it real closely, what's very interesting to look at the sensitivity of both investment flows and the performance of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. It's obviously highly correlated with other capital markets, but has tended to recover faster, both from all external events, be they financial, security events, and the like. There's a remarkable continuity. And even though the rates, it's not been able to escape the rates of decline that have affected the second order effects, the second derivative effects here on the economy are quite interesting. If you've got a 6% rate of decline overall in many of the OECD countries, or in, say, compared to the United States, roughly around a 3%. So you have around 50% of the decline from the worst financial crisis that we've experienced, at least those of us that were born after the Depression have experienced. So that there's been much less of an impact in Israel, and experienced relatively higher growth rates and GDP growth rates relative to other advanced economies. Its per capita income is competitive with the most advanced countries within the EU. There's been a broad consensus on conservative fiscal policies that have kept the budget deficits under control. and that the structure economy has moved away from the large public sector and heavy government intervention and towards a more flexible private sector-driven economy. The government has begun to shrink, and entrepreneurs have been able to grow quite rapidly. Many of them are here with you today, and to represent what this model of growth is, both for Israel, the region, and the world. The shrinking has been consistent over time, as reflected in these figures, and as more importantly, has started to affect an increasing labor force participation rate, which was quite important. Until recently, unemployment's been falling, and at the same time, the participation rate has existed as people who had not been in the labor force start to enter, as there's been a change in transfer payments and welfare policies. The structure of exports is also quite important here. If you look at the ability of the country to raise capital overseas, as well as raise capital within the own countries, liberalization also within the pension investment system and the like, the products and services that have developed, all of which Sharona elucidated before, and the whole work of the technology sector to move from not only the R&D phase, but also, as I think you'll see during the course of the day, enormous amounts of applications, and the movement from R&D to the development of companies that can truly be, not unlike the Dutch West Indies company, global corporations and global organizations that are dealing with global problems that are all incubated within that hothouse. There's no problem that exists on the face of the planet that doesn't exist in a highly refracted, intensified state within Israel, be it a water problem, be it a human relations problems, be it the issues of education, be it the issues of infrastructure and the like. And all of those problems create an enormous laboratory for solving problems in a beta test site that's able to then broadcast the development of solutions and brands throughout the economy and throughout the world. With that, I'm going to close and see if there are any questions, I guess, if we have any time for that.
I have a question, Glenn. You innovated a great technology, a great financial instrument in Israel, which are the parking lots, which I know you've alluded to. And many of you will learn today that Glen brought to Israel some ideas about financing municipal bonds that Israel heretofore did not have, and we've been able to, with Glen's thought process and abilities, export our municipal financing methods into Israel. And Glen, if you expand on that for a minute.
Well, just as you said, I mean, there's about 4 cities that have done issuance currently in terms of structured finance, and some project financing, and also multiple bank facilities have also emerged from it. But all of them are trying to look at ways that there can be financial solutions to these growth gaps that we're discussing, both in terms of the macroeconomic growth, labor and productivity growth, and social equality. And so those are definitely transferable. I think many of the things that have done also in the venture capital sector were quite innovative that came here and were improvised there. I think, as we'll hear a lot, the notion of institutionalized improvisation is one of the key competitive advantages that you see in the economy. And despite of all of these, the issues of dealing with the regional conflicts, dealing with conflicts and growth gaps within the country, there is always this notion that problems can be solved and that solutions can be found. And that was the last little bit of textual analysis that I wanted to talk about. I was driving around the other day, and we've all been focused, I think, on hope since the election. And there was a sign someplace that said hope is a verb. And I was thinking, in many ways, Israel is a verb. And the notion of finding solutions, and yes, we can, which the president has certainly articulated very well, was derived from the text of Cesar Chavez, a Californian, who said "si se puede," which was derived from a statement by Theodor Herzl, which said, if you translate it in German, if you will it, it is not a dream, or it is not a legend or a fairy tale, which is actually derived from Joshua in the Torah, who said, yes, we can do it. Yachol nuchal. But in any case, any other questions?
Yes, right there. Stand and would you, in this forum, because we're a business forum, please say your name and your company and then your question.
Certainly. A whole number of them. One of the main things is to, talking about increasing labor force participation was a major part of it. One of the major causes of poverty is lack of people going to work or having jobs. Certain communities, the Israeli, Palestinian Arab community not joining the labor force, the ultra-Orthodox. So the incentives not to work have begun to be removed, more will be removed, and people then enter the labor force. The other really main focus is to provide money in the small business sector for firm formation. The work of the Office of the Chief Scientist and the technology companies is seen as one of the most successful science and technology programs in the world. And similarly to the ability to generate loans, we helped establish, very proud of Chagit Rubenstein, in the Kareti Israel Economic Development Fund program, just gave their 1,000th loan, microloan, in Rahat, in the Negev, to Bedouin women in terms of setting up agricultural businesses. So that ability to access capital to become economically independent is important across the whole range. Other things that go on in terms of urban revitalization, ability to, we have some of our fellows working on affordable housing models, many of working workforce housing. All those types of dynamics are there as well, but clearly overcoming the education and the participation gaps is one of the key measures.
Fortunately, Glen is here in Southern California. As you know,
Sometimes,
but he's not
go
in
to Israel next week.
He's here, and because Glen is very instrumental in every April or so is the annual Milken conference, which has a host of wonderful people, not only about Israel, but from around the world. However, Glen makes sure that there's always a series of panels on Israel with other Israeli leaders, thought-provoking market makers and market changers. And if I can, Glen, make an appeal that all of you sign up for Glen's Milken conference annually, but only right after you sign up for this.
It's very important.
Next year.
We're very, very proud that Schroeder's taken the initiative here on this conference. If you'd like to see any of the videos from last year's conference, they're on our website. That covered issues like water, like financing Israel's future, like the issues about innovation. Also a very important Israel-Palestinian economic development panel of joint ventures that are occurring in business formation and investment there, both on water projects, on technology projects, and housing. Thanks.
Glen, I want to thank you very much for your outstanding comments. This is a great gift from the Israel Conference to you, talking a little bit about the economy of California as we're expanding it forward. Thank you. It's a wonderful way to start a business conference with one of the leading economists of our time, and I really, again, if we could give another round of applause to Glen Yeago, a great friend, a great thinker, and an inspiring person. A quality of the Israel Conference has an idea of palette changing. And palette changing is as we immerse ourselves into topics of great content and deep thinking, we also want to stimulate our minds to see what is the technology that's out there that is in fact market changing. So today, in between each panel, as you'll see in your books, and every presenter is fully described here, so you can get a little orientation to it. But in between every panel, we have what we call Fast and Cool, which is a feature of the Israel Conference to bring to you some mind-stimulating ideas, to provoke your desire to get involved in one of these companies, to build your own company, to do a deal, and to make more business happen. We're going to be very fortunate today at 1:15, right after lunch, to have a whole series of Fast and Cools back-to-back with technology guru Jeff Pulver, who's come here all the way from New York, to help us go through a whole bunch of ideas from 1:15. Then we have some more at 4 and again at 5. But this morning we have a very special one to start our day with a topic that's near and dear to my heart. As a young girl, I loved to play with dolls. and I'm sure many of you too. You don't want to admit it in public, but I know you do. We have a wonderful company to tell us about their technology. It's a company called Stardoll, and we have the EVP and General Manager of Stardoll, a gentleman named Matt Palmer, which I'd like to have him come up. And let's have a little palette-changing, mind-shifting interlude with the company known as Stardoll.
And now for something completely different. Good morning, everybody. Who all thought when they woke up this morning we'd be talking about dolls, paper dolls online? Anybody? Well, I know I was, but I'm not sure about all of you. But I do want to dive into something that's very different, and hopefully, as Sharona illustrated, will bend your thinking and give you something a little different to think about today. Stardoll is something that started about 5.5 years ago. I'll start with a bit of a story. I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast. Lisa, a Finnish woman who lives in the tiny town of Turku in northern Finland, retired early for health reasons from a difficult life as a factory worker. She found herself at home with her children, and in the 5.5 years ago, there was a lot of options for her boys who were playing online, but her daughter didn't have any. So she combined a childhood love of paper doll dress up with the idea of taking that online and creating a virtual world around that. And with that, she taught herself Flash. She bought a computer, taught herself Flash, and started drawing celebrity dolls and creating pieces of clothing to simply dress them up. It was as simple as that. She posted it on something at the time called GeoCities. GeoCities was a free platform, and it took off virally at an amazing speed, and such that it's grown to today, which I'll share some figures with you. The most important being that we have over 32 million registered users, grown after just 5 years and 3 years as Stardoll. So that story is really important because from Lisa, this wasn't just an idea that was written by an MBA. This comes from the heart and soul and passion of this woman in Finland, and has grown to a global phenomenon and to what it is today. So, and part of what's grown that, if we could advance to the next slide, is media. I mean, the most important thing I could say today is the power and influence of not only what story is told about you in the media, both consumer and trade, but the viral effect of the product that you have. Our users, who I'll describe in a moment, are vivacious users of our product. And that has led us to a terrific place and momentum, to the point that kids and teens and tween girls sign up to the rate of 40 to 50,000 new users a day. And as you'll see here, we were picked recently within the ad community as one of the top innovations of 2008, and also on the digital top 10 list, amongst the likes of Facebook, iPhone. That's great company to be a part of as a paper doll dress-up concern. Also, I do want to take a moment, because I sort of skipped over this, to talk about our funding. Since we are a funding community of people in the room today, 3 years ago, when the momentum was really taking off, it was discovered by one of our investors, a guy named Danny Reimer at Index, based out of London. His niece introduced it to him. He saw the opportunity immediately and approached Lisa and started the conversation there. Today, our funding is supported by not only Index, but the wonderful Sequoia, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today, and you'll actually hear from Randy Ditzler and the team under his leadership and his engaging Israeli companies. That's one of the reasons I'm here today, is for the likes and thanks to the funding from folks like you guys who make these dreams come true and make them happen for many, many millions of happy users around the world. So that is our connection. So let's talk about what is Stardoll. On the next slide, you'll see that there's sort of 3 points to what we're all about. There's fame, there's fashion, and there's friendship. Those are the cores of us. Everything from celebrity, dress up and engaging your favorite celebrities, to fashion. That's the core opportunity on Stardoll. You go shopping virtually, you buy virtual goods, you dress up what's called a me doll. And I'll show you what that is in a moment. And which is basically an avatar. And then friendship, that's the social network and fabric of the site. That's where you meet people from all over the world, and you talk about fashion among many other things. But those are the 3 core attributes of what we're all about. So who's on Stardoll? primarily teen and tween girls aged 9 to 17. Our sweet spot's about 15. I've illustrated a little information around that. But they're talking about fashion. They're talking about what's going on in the world of entertainment. They're expressing themselves by dressing themselves up virtually, sharing that, and dressing up their friends as well. We're also a global concern. We are in over 200 countries and regions around the world. We translate our site into 15 different languages, and we reach over 200 different countries around the world. So that's who the user is. And what they do on Stardoll is this. This is a typical sort of snapshot in a visit. Our average visit is about 12 minutes in length for every single visit that we have. And what a user does here, as you'll see on the screen, is this is Julie. Julie lives in LA. She's 13 years old. She's come home from school. She says, I want to go on Stardoll and see what I can do. The first thing she does is she logs on. Now, mind you, before she's done this, she has, for free, built an avatar and been given 25 free Stardollars to go shopping with, and set herself up. But once she's set up, she arrives at her home page and she finds out what's new, what's happening on Stardoll that day. She may dive into Stardoll magazine and see, oh, we've got a new video clip for a new film or a new product or TV show or something that's out there. She may watch that. She may move on and see, oh, a pick of the day. Here's a new dress I didn't even know about that I can buy virtually. Maybe Stardoll drew it. Maybe it's made by one of Stardoll's partners or advertisers like DKNY or Kohl's. So she can buy that virtually and add it to her suite. And that's where she goes shopping in the middle in Star Plaza. Once she has that and picked it up when she's shopping, she puts it in her closet in the lower left-hand corner. You can see what her suite looks like. Millions of kids have the opportunity to visit that, get to know her, understand who she is, and that's how she looks at the end of her visit. So that's a very quick 5-minute snapshot. Hopefully I've given you enough to chew on for the day, but I think that's my 5 minutes. Hopefully it was fast and cool for you. Thank you for your time.
I want to thank you very much for participating, for showing us something fast and cool, and changing our thought process about how fun it is to play with dolls. Let's get all those girls and boys online playing with Stardoll. Thank you. Pleasure. Appreciate it. It's very exciting when we are able to come across technology, get to know the technologists and the business people behind it. A question that was asked as we were developing this conference was, are Israeli VCs funding any non-Israeli companies? And we came across a statistic that's very interesting. As the Israeli VCs expand their view, of course, a critical mission of them is to invest in Israel-based, Israel-focused companies. And here at the conference, we define Israel Focus as a company that has its base of operations in Israel, has its R&D in Israel, has major business that they're doing in Israel, or invests in Israel. And we're introducing more broadly the term Israel-facing, which all of you will become more Israel-facing. One of the largest VCs worldwide is Sequoia, which will be joining us in a few minutes as our panel starts to come up for our next panel, and I'd like to invite the next group. The Sequoia has a desk in Israel called Sequoia Israel, and you'll find that many of the very large VCs have moved some of their base of operations into Israel because they know that great things are coming out of it. But last year in 2008, over almost $100 million of Israeli VC money was invested into companies that are not founded in Israel, but expand their base of operations to Israel. And that's part of the growth of our worldwide market that's coming out of Israel. That makes it very exciting, and it makes it possible for companies to extend the arm to do business and create a solid line of business interest and stakeholdership in growing companies and technologies that are coming out of Israel that affect our job creation here in California and throughout the globe.